today. John Matherly. And if you have not heard of John Matherly, you've certainly heard of Shodan. And if you have not heard of Shodan, you do not understand what's going on right now in security. John Matherly is an internet cartographer, speaker, and founder of Shodan, the world's first search engine for internet-connected devices. Born and raised in Switzerland, he attended the Fries Gymnasium in Zurich, where he majored in business and law until he moved to San Diego at the age of 17. He then worked at the San Diego Supercomputer Center to help manage the world's foremost protein data bank. At the same time, he was also attending University of California's San Diego bioinformatics program, which would kindle the fascination with large data and efficient algorithms. His final project included analyzing the human genome for exon code regions and mapping them to proteins while accounting for alternate splicing. After graduating, he worked as a freelance software engineer at a variety of companies, including bioinformatics work. In 2009, his project, the Shodan search engine, was unveiled on Twitter, and within hours, the website received a lot of attention due to the unexpected discoveries that people made. Printers, webcams, power plants, and many more of them unprotected or minimally protected were found over time. And the revelations have changed the way security and privacy on the internet has been perceived. Shodan has already seen TV, cell phones, traffic lights, industrial controls, infrastructure plants, various home appliances pop up in search results. And I can tell you, in my talk, everything showed up in Shodan as well. And there are more of these Internet of Things are added each day as the world is becoming more connected. For the past years, he's been featured on CNBC, CNN and Money, Bloomberg, Washington Post, Forbes, and many other. Please welcome John Matherly.
No? Yeah, okay. You should have said something. Jeez. What is this? So I run a search engine called Shodan. A lot of you already know about it, but just so everybody's on the same page, I'll spend a few minutes talking about what it is, how it's been used, kind of history of it. So I like to say that it's a search engine for internet-connected devices. It's kind of a umbrella term, because I don't like saying the web, because that's what Google does. And so, a large degree, I need to separate myself from the de facto search engine that everybody thinks about. So Google finds websites, Shodan finds devices. I launched a project 4 years ago. If you remember this website, you're probably one of the first users of Shodan. It's changed a lot since then. Back when I launched, I had like 4 million devices in the search engine. It was pretty small. And I'll talk about later. This is how it looks nowadays. If you go to shodanhq.com, you'll see this. It's very straightforward. It's a search engine. There's a bar. You type stuff in, you get results. And then when you look at the results, they're very different than the Google search. Google is all about content and crawling the web. Shodan is essentially an nmap of the internet turned into a search engine. So I scan the internet 24/7 all the time, and I make the data available through the website. So here in the banners, you can see that I store the city, the country, the operating system. I store all sort of metadata, sort of a fingerprint of a device, and I make that available to you to search. And I'm working on newer versions of Shodan because the website hasn't been updated in a long time. I've been making a lot of changes in the amount of data I collect and everything else, but hopefully I'll be able to announce a new version of Shodan very soon. What I have done, though, is provided new ways of looking at the data. So banners are very difficult for the average person to understand. They're not very sexy, they're just text. So if you're trying to explain to somebody or visualize the data, If you just show them a search results page of Shodan, you're not going to get very far. They're not going to really get the significance of these things. So I created a tool so you can map all the results from Shodan, similar to Google Maps. The interface was very much inspired by Google Maps. It's copied, but you type it in. It is, it's what people are used to. Right? That's a big part when you write a tool. You need to write something that people are already familiar with. If there's a huge learning curve, nobody's going to use it, especially if it's already a kind of a nuanced technical tool. You need to make it accessible. So this is Shodan Maps. You zoom in, it'll show you what's in that area. It works very, very well. So whenever I do interviews or stuff like that, it's very powerful to show, I found this home automation system, and they go, well, can you find one in my area? So I zoom into the area, and I'm like, yes, this is your neighbor. Not directly. That kind of thing. Makes it accessible, and it's also nice to look at. These are things, good for presentations and stuff. So I'm also releasing other tools to let the average, security guy, I guess, make their data more searchable. I constantly get people asking me, so I want to help Shodan. Can I submit my own data to you? And the answer is no, because I don't trust you. That's just how it works in security, right? You just can't trust everybody. The first version of Shodan was actually sort of a peer-to-peer client that integrated with Nmap. So you do an Nmap scan, and then you could automatically share that with other people. That was my original idea. But knowing DEF CON crowd, that's never going to work. People are going to submit all these fake Nmap results, and very soon it'll just become too noisy. And I didn't really know how to solve that efficiently at the time. So I decided just, I'll only show what I collect. I'll kind of filter it that way. But if you have your own Nmap results, I provide tools like ScanHub where you can upload your Nmap XML, and it'll turn into a mini Shodan, so you can make it searchable. And here are some of the services I cover nowadays. So I've really expanded. Initially, it was mostly web. Web is easy to crawl for. It's very popular. It's very accessible. Almost all the major Shodan discoveries have been through web servers, just because you can point and click your browser. You don't need extra software. There's no command line involved. It's really, really easy to get started finding webcams, finding all these things with web. But I do way more than web. I do way, way more than web nowadays. So to me, web is not as interesting. For example, I have SNMP, I have UPnP, Telnet. Telnet is huge. RDP, bunch of databases, Redis, Memcache. I don't know how familiar you guys are with some of these newer NoSQL products. I also index those. Here's a breakdown of the types of services that are stored in the database. So yes, the largest chunk are still web servers. That shouldn't really be a surprise. Web servers are everywhere. They're very easy to deploy, et cetera, et cetera. But compare Telnet with SSH. I don't know if I have SSH on here. Or even HTTPS. Yeah, actually you do see. So Telnet is way over here, I think. And SSH is somewhere over here. There are more Telnet servers than there are SSH servers. There are more Telnet devices than there are SSH devices. And that should tell you something about the reality of the internet. Most of us operate in a completely data center, server-centric mentality. But the reality of what's actually deployed on the internet is very different. So also, tons of UPnP and other things that you really wouldn't expect to see online are actually massively exposed. Dave kind of talked about it with FTP. And one way you can use Shodan is to learn about how the internet is configured, how the software is used. Dave talked about anonymous FTP. Well, you can do the same thing with Shodan. You can go to Shodan at any point in time and figure out how many anonymous FTP sites are there. I crawl the internet, every month. Dave said, he did half of, class A. Well, I do the whole internet every month. So at any point in time, you can learn about the internet, and you can break things down. You can find, well, is there a bias in who is configuring the FTP anonymous? He was saying he was looking for certain routers that, certain versions are automatically configured to be anonymous. You can easily detect that with Shodan, because you just facet on different properties, and it'll just pop out immediately. And obviously, Heartbleed, is the latest thing everybody wants to talk about. And I actually test for that. So Heartbleed, the OpenSSL vulnerability, is something that I am keeping track of. So this is current. I think I took the snapshot last night. And I don't only test HTTPS. This is another thing where a lot of people are focused on the web servers. Everybody always looks at web. But what about these other things? What about POP3, IMAP? There are other things that use SSL. You should probably check those too. It's not just HTTPS. In terms of general usage of Shodan as a business, so there are three main categories I like to put the users in. So there's research, there are university users. I provide the data for free to universities. So if you have a university program for security, whatever else, talk to me. I give you free access. And they use it to learn about internet topology and all this kind of obvious research stuff. Then there's general security, where people, they, in the organization, they want to get an external fingerprint of the network. Maybe they're a small business, they're a small utility. They don't really have a formal security program. They can't afford an expensive scanner, whatever else. They just use Shodan. You can use it for free for that purpose. Not a big deal. And finally, market intelligence. And that's what Shodan was originally developed for. When I created Shodan, I created sort of a netcraft for everything. I don't know how many people know about netcraft. It's a service that keeps track of which data centers are using what type of web software. It tracks the usage of web software, essentially. And I thought, that's really cool, but I want to have it for everything. And I want to have the data myself. So that's what I came into it. I wanted to provide, companies like Cisco or Juniper or whoever else, information about who are your customers exactly, how have they configured your products, how have your competitors' products been configured, are the licenses expiring. So when I created Shodan, I thought there would be a real value for businesses to learn about this information. Obviously, it's not how it's turned out initially. Nowadays, some companies are using it. Actually, I'm also seeing insurance companies use it. They're starting to use Shodan to see, if you acquire a new company, you run a search on Shodan on a company to see, are they running things that they shouldn't be running? Are they exposing themselves that they probably shouldn't be? And that should factor into your evaluation. And then if you're an insurance company, it's do you want to insure somebody that is running, Modbus or Telnet or all these things massively on a network? Those are things they're starting to factor in, because it affects their bottom line. If you insure a company that is completely negligent in security, you're opening yourself up. So we're starting to see some adoption in that. In terms of the raw database size, I'm currently tracking around 550 million devices. So it's not a huge amount. But I generate billions of devices, billions of banners each month. So many of these devices run more than just a web server. They run SSH, they run RDP, some MySQL, whatever else. So I collect billions of banners a month, but around 550 million devices. And I like to say that I think conservatively speaking, the World Wide Web, as most people know it, is served by 50 million devices. At least publicly. There might be more devices behind a gateway and stuff like that. But as far as I can see from the internet, just from the outside perspective, the World Wide Web that's served by Google and everybody else, 50 million devices. So there's the obvious question, what about the other 500 million devices? What are they doing? And if you start looking into it, this is kind of a mind share versus reality. Everybody works with Google. Everybody uses all the social networking websites. It's all about the web. But the web is really just a slice of the pie. It's not the whole thing. So when people always say, well, how does it compare to Google? Well, Google just looks at the web. I mean, obviously, they do a very good job and they have huge amounts of, the web is huge. But the internet is a whole different thing. There's all this other stuff out there, like office buildings, factories, basically tons and tons of embedded stuff. Yeah, once you start looking, even if you just fire up Nmap and start scanning, random IPs, you'll immediately notice that you're not going to find that many Apache, Nginx, whatever else. You're going to find a shitload of embedded devices, like modems, routers, printers. Yeah, printers was I think the first search that people did on Shodan. I released it 4.5 years ago, and I had 30 followers on Twitter at the time. And I just posted it, because I worked on it for a while, a few months, and I figured I'd just put something out there. I released it. I posted about it on Twitter, and I think H.D. Moore picked up on it. I don't know how he found it, but he did. And he was able to find printers with it. And from there, it just kind of exploded. And people found all this other stuff as well. And printers are really fun because you can do cool stuff with them. Obviously, you can use them to send images, and you can print remotely whatever you want. But you can also keep track of their status. So for example, just for fun, I did a survey to keep track of which universities need their toner replaced. You can search at any moment in time and be like, which companies need new paper, need new toner. You can keep track of all this stuff. And some people have suggested using that for social engineering. You can keep track of when are the printers at the company you're trying to pen test actually running out of paper, stuff like that. And all of a sudden you show up and you're like, hey, I'm here to replace paper and toner. It's interesting information from a very boring device. Just keep that in mind. And then Dave mentioned yesterday about all these FTP sites. Well, there are tons and tons and tons of NAS devices. And they're really popular with small businesses. They're super popular with small businesses. They store everything on them. Passports. I mean, he went over that very well, so I don't want to really rehash it. But you can find everything. You can find huge movie collections. Everything is out there. So this is an iPhone. People sometimes ask me, should I root my phone, blah, blah. To the average person, I would definitely recommend no. Because if you root your phone and you don't know what you're doing, this happens. This is one example of somebody roots their phone, they download some software, installs a web server, bam, you're on the internet. Welcome to Shodan. And people do the same thing with Android phones, and you have turn it into a webcam. So if you don't really know what you're doing, you should probably not root your phone. So to non-technical people, definitely do not root your phone. This is an ATM machine, just to kind of show you the breadth of things you can find. The store ID, and you can go in. And the company's really cool because they advertise this as a really big benefit to you as a business. How cool is this? You're remote, you're in your home. You can keep track. Whenever somebody deposits in your ATM, you'll get notified. You can pull up your iPhone. You can keep track of everything where you're going to go. This is great, right? And this is a Google building in Australia. People sometimes are under the assumption that all these things only happen to small businesses, people who don't understand security. It will never happen to Google. They have huge budgets, blah, 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 blah. It happens to everybody. In this case, they hired a contractor because Google didn't have in-house knowledge of PLCs and all these control systems. They hired somebody. The guy put it online, no authentication, full access to the building. It's a very new building, looks very nice inside. This is another university, same kind of building situation. Universities are the most exposed organizations on the internet. I don't know whether it's lack of funding or what the problem is, but almost every single big security issue that you find, PLCs, control systems, everything else, universities always top the chart. I don't know why. Okay. All right. It's a very interesting decision. Yeah. So I guess there's your answer. That makes sense. That makes sense. Yeah, I guess universities are this completely alternate reality. Yeah. I used to work in universities, I know. There's a fun story. I worked at the protein data bank, and one year we were under budget. So what they did is they decided, holy crap, we need to spend the money, otherwise we're going to lose it. What they did is they spent the money on 30-inch monitors, like the Mac, 30-inch monitors for everybody. And the lead developers got 2 of them, because why not? Turns out they actually miscalculated, and then they were over budget, so they had to fire people. So just university life is very weird. And I guess it reflects in their internet. So I'm starting to talk about more industrial control systems. This is a ski rail. If you go skiing and you go up the mountain on like this tram-like thing, they're on the internet sometimes. You can open the doors, you can stop them, you can see the speed they're going. These are still web interfaces though. So somebody actively made the decision to create a web interface for the PLC and put it on the internet. These are not accidents. They're not like, oh, I didn't know what I was doing, whatever else. I wanted to be on the internet. They probably just thought nobody could find it. Because again, if it's not on Google, how will you ever find it? I don't know. This is kind of a famous one. You've probably seen it if you follow me on Twitter or followed Shodan. It's a crematorium. It's really creepy. I didn't know what it first was. The flames, everything else. But then you start looking at the buttons, and it's like different settings. One is infant, like person 1, person 2. And, the person that is being cremated shows up here. It's like a real-time view of people getting cremated. And no authentication over the internet. Whoever thought this was a good idea. And again, factories. I could honestly go on for hours. I think other people have created talks where all they do is just talk about the stuff you can find on Shodan. It's just unlimited amount. This is a car wash. I like putting this example in because I think it's a device that people don't really think about in terms of having a computer or having a web server. But everything nowadays, they're putting stuff in, computers in them. They're so small, you can put them everywhere. This is a wind farm. And I like wind farms, and I like a lot of these control systems because they provide a lot of details. Like even without logging in, you can see how many turbines do they have. Over here. So you can keep track of all these statistics of a wind farm without ever logging in. You don't need to log into anything to get the information. And I have my own scripts where I keep track of these wind farms, and over time I can see which countries are producing the most wind power, how many turbines are being deployed. This is all openly available information, no authentication. This is how it looks in the real world. A bunch of wind farms, they all connect to a PLC. The PLC manages them, and that's what you can talk to. And this is a cyclotron in Berkeley. It was one of the earliest finds, like serious ones. It was discovered because it was available over NetBIOS. So you could just, download files and interact with it directly. And this is probably the biggest one found by Dan Tendler. It's a hydroelectric dam in France. It's a big dam. And the dam actually also has a history of flooding and organization being generally negligent. And taking this one down has been a really big problem. The people in charge of the device, in charge of the dam, they don't understand security. Like, I know the DHS contacted the French CERT, and they were like, hey, you guys have this thing online. You should probably take it offline. They're like, no, it's okay. Don't worry about it. Like, no, just please take it down. And they're like, it took more than a year. It took more than a year from when they knew it was online to actually fixing it. I don't really blame the French CERT directly because I think it's just like one guy. But the people actually in charge, they don't understand security. It's just such a foreign concept to them that, how would anybody ever use this? Why would anybody care to connect? And if I haven't scared you enough, there are tons of articles online on Shodan. Tons and tons of articles. You mentioned in the introduction, I was interviewed by CNN Money. I was actually in Disney World when they interviewed me. It was like it's my birthday and vacation. I get an email from CNN. I'm like, holy crap. So I call them back, and it was fun. And Bloomberg, there are just a bunch of articles. The titles are always very, very alarmist. I think that's just how security works. If you're trying to write an article, they always have the titles are always insanely FUD-oriented. Many of these articles, the actual content is not that bad, but if you just Google for Shodan, you're going to find a lot of scary titles. And very often the journalists afterwards actually come to me and they're like, look, I'm sorry, the title is a bit, over the top, but, just don't worry about it. The content itself should be better. And what I usually say whenever anybody talks to me about Shodan, like, well, it's really dangerous. What about all these bad guys that could be using Shodan? Well, first of all, it's a tool, right? Almost everybody here uses Nmap. Nmap is a defensive and offensive tool. I think security in general falls into this like weird category where almost everything you do is inherently offensive and defensive. Like, it's very rare that you can split those things up. So I always try to make the distinction between the tool and the actual discovery. So I always try to say that it's not Shodan that's scary. It's scary that people are putting hydroelectric dams on the internet. It's not the tool. Don't blame the messenger kind of thing. Go after the vendor. Go after the dam owner. Go after the people who are not following, any sort of security procedures. But it's difficult because that's a nuanced point that many people don't understand. The first interview I ever did for Shodan, the journalist asked me whether I could help him find elevators and I could make them crash. So to give you an idea of just the mindset of some of these, how they try to frame it, it always has to be a story. Shodan has been around for 4.5 years, and only recently has there been, maybe like a year and a half, news coverage has really picked up. Because for the longest time, they didn't know how to phrase it as a story. So if you create a tool that's very useful and very interesting, unless you can phrase it in a way where the average user can either emotionally get connected to it or otherwise, relatable, they're not going to talk about it. So you should be aware of that when, you read about news and everything else. Unless they can phrase it in a certain way and attract the audience, you're just not going to hear about it. And most people I talk to, most journalists, they ask me, well, how can I protect myself? What can I do? I want to make sure that you can't, connect to my laptop that I have here. I'm like, don't worry about that. But even so, many of them still say, I think I'm fine. I put duct tape over my webcam, so you can't see me. And I'm like, wow, okay, this is your level of understanding. You're so far, you don't understand the technology at all. Like the basics of an internet, the world is really scary. Like sometimes I feel like the world is becoming really, really magical to people who are not in security, who are not in a technical field. Like it's just completely mind-boggling, right? You hear about a search engine that, finds things. So now all of a sudden, everything you own, this guy can see. It's not the case, right? It's not how it really works. But if you don't understand the internet, if you don't know how devices talk to each other, it's really difficult to explain. And especially now, everybody talks about the Internet of Things. Everything is becoming connected. Everything. It'll only get worse. So this is like a Lockitron. It was a Kickstarter project where you can control the door lock over your phone. So you replace your front door. You add this, I think. Behind the door, just add it, bolt it in or something. And then you can control it over your iPhones. If your friend wants to get into your house and you're at work, no problem, you can do that. It's very cool. It's really, really cool stuff. But obviously there are security implications, and it really makes understanding the internet and connectivity more complicated. And then you have, just random weird things. I don't know, whoever. This is like an egg carton that is connected. So, you take an egg out, it's going to sync it with your phone over the cloud server. So you're like, oh, well, this is important. I only have 3 eggs left. Let me buy more eggs. This is a real product. This is not like some, prototype. It's cool, right? And also these things keep track of everything. So you can keep track of, have the egg sizes shrunk? Because, it'll have weight sensors and everything else. So another side effect of this is that you're starting to generate way, way more data. I don't want to talk about big data, but you generate a lot more data, and you can keep track of that over time. So from my perspective, what this leads to is questions like this, where I have people that contact me and say, hey, I heard about this Shodan, and it can find things, right? Well, I lost my video camcorder. Well, where is it? I'm like, oh, I don't know what to help. I don't know what to do. I can't help you with that. Sorry. And this is not unusual. Almost after every big event, like the Boston Marathon bombing, I had people emailing me saying, hey, can you help locate, the bombers and stuff like that. I'm like, no, this isn't. I can't just arbitrarily find everything that exists in the world. It's not like that. But these people, very often they found it through CNN, so that's kind of the target But it's the average user, you know? I don't want to paint a bad picture of CNN or whatever else. It's just, that's the average user. They don't get it. To them, it's just this technology, this black box that can find everything, you know? It's like, that's how it works. So let me start talking about the actual technology side of Shodan. So I want to have some brief bullet points, since I get it asked a lot. It scans 24/7, and the website is updated usually 24/7. I don't do it in schedules. I don't do it, you know, once we upload it, you know, every day or something like that. It's real time. I update it all the time. And I do random scanning. So a lot of you guys monitor your network and everything else. And you might see traffic from Shodan. Well, you should be seeing traffic from Shodan. And you should know that I don't scan by network. Again, originally the idea was to provide market intelligence. And if you provide market intelligence to businesses, you don't want to be biased based on hosting provider. So I don't want to scan Amazon, and then if you search Shodan at that point, right after I scanned Amazon, you're like, oh wow, the whole world runs on MongoDB. You know, you don't want to do that. So I scan randomly. I want to have a uniform distribution of data. It's very important. So at any point in time when you query Shodan, it will not be biased towards a network. So I run it distributed, you know, different nodes around the world. I do it non-intrusively. I don't actively check for, you know, in-depth exploits. I don't do brute forcing. Like for FTP, I don't actually access the file system in any way. I just try an anonymous login, and that's it. I don't try to create a folder to test, read, write. I don't do any of that. It's very, you know, like hands-off. Again, I need to keep it above, you know, board. And on average, I'd say I scan the internet every month for all services. So in terms of actual technologies that I use, my database is Cassandra. I don't know, it's really cool. It's very fast for writing. Almost everything I do otherwise is in Python. I love Python. If you have any questions about Python, I'd be happy to help. Like the crawler, the website, everything is Python. All my scripts are Python. I think Python is fantastic. And then I use Redis for like a caching, you know, queuing system. This is the web framework I use for Shodan. It's called Pyramid. It's a Python web framework. If you want to do something web development, check it out. I think it's pretty good. So in terms of the actual crawler, I don't run Nmap. You know, people sometimes think I do, but Nmap is a bit too slow for my purposes. You know, you can optimize it, but it's not really made for scanning the internet well. So I use a technology called stateless scanning. You might have heard about it. There are a few talks on it, like MassScan and ZMap. They were released, you know, months ago. Technologies, though, the algorithms were around for more than 10 years. Like I heard about it from Dan Kaminsky, because he wrote a tool called ScanRand. And the way it works is a typical port scan, like an Nmap. You send a SYN packet, and you wait for the SYN-ACK. You know, like you connect, and you wait whether anybody responds. And if a certain timeout has been reached, then you move on to the next port. Stateless scanning changes that. It separates the process, or the step, into two processes. So you have one process that all it does is send packets. That's all it does. It sends packets with a small alteration. The sequence ID of the SYN packet is the hash of the source IP, destination IP, source port, and destination port. So you hash the information of the SYN packet, you stick it into the sequence ID. Then in a totally separate process, it can be in a different device, totally separate, all you do is listen for SYN-ACK packets. And in that process, you take the acknowledgement ID of the packet, you subtract 1, and you check whether that equals the hash of the packet. So this way, you never need to wait. There's no timeout involved. You just keep blasting packets all the time, and whenever somebody responds, you'll automatically know. It's very, very fast. Very fast. So I wrote my own scanner like years ago, C++ and Python. If you talk to me on Twitter and you're like, hey, John, can you add the service? This is what I do. I just write a Python class. I upload it. Scanner picks it up. So if you want me to help you scan the internet or anything like that, I do that. So for individuals, I help you serve the internet for free. If you can send me a Python script, I'm basically good to go. So just keep that in mind. If you ever need any help from Shodan or anything like that, this is how I do it. And The reason I did it this way, there are different approaches to stateless scanning. My approach was never be the fastest, because there are things you can do to go even faster. The stateless scanning to other things. My scanner is not the fastest. My scanner is not as fast as MassScan or ZMap, whatever else. But to me, it was never about just speed. I designed my system. I don't care whether I can scan the internet in 1 hour or 5 hours. That difference is not important to me. For me, it was about, I want to have a flexible way of quickly iterating on things. If you contact me on Twitter, within half an hour, I'm starting to scan. I don't need to compile and see stuff. There's nothing complicated involved. Especially if there's like a Python library available for like MongoDB or Redis or whatever else, I'm good to go. So for me, it was about quickly iterating and quickly just releasing stuff. And yeah, in terms of speed, the limiting factor for Shodan was never technology. Like, you heard about MassScan and ZMap, and it's like really cool, you can scan the internet very fast. That was never the problem. The problem for Shodan was never speed. It was always abuse emails. It was always actually just making sure that your relationship with the hosting provider is good. I mean, that's really the limiting factor. So I'll talk about abuse emails later. This is the server that powered Shodan for the first year. It's a Dell Vostro. I bought it for $150 of a Dell outlet. I mean, just to give you an idea, you don't need to start a project with, a real server or real everything. It's just go cheap. Just go cheap, make it work, and see whether anybody cares enough to like start building it up from there. It ran Shodan fine for the first year, no problems. Swapped out some hard drives, good to go. So I don't have a personal vendetta with the cloud, but I do not run anything on the cloud. To me, the cloud is very expensive. It's just not worth it to me, especially with my amount of like especially outbound traffic. I can't run on the cloud. It's just not feasible yet. So. FYI, sometimes people tweet me, why are you running on the cloud? I'm like, I'm not. So I spoke about the crawlers and how distributed they are. These are the countries that my crawlers are located. So this is important because I don't want to be regionally biased. Or sometimes I do want to be regionally biased. I have crawlers in the US, Iceland, Romania, and recently I started adding servers in China. So I'm starting to be able to provide a perspective. I can tell you how the internet looks like from the perspective of China. I can tell you how the internet looks like from the perspective of Iceland. So this is something that I'm starting to incorporate, where you can ask Shodan not just about the internet as a whole, but how do other people see the internet? I think it's really powerful. So let me talk a bit about abuse emails. Obviously, the majority of them are generated by automated systems like firewalls. And honestly, they're just a nuisance, because the majority of them are automated, and I never get a reply back. So they send me an abuse email, I reply back, and they never respond. I don't know whether you generate automatic abuse emails, but if you do, please at least respond. It's very just frustrating. You're trying to explain, you're trying to have a dialogue, and it just, that they sort of set up these systems, and they just forget about them. Never maintain them. They don't go away. It's just part of the business. Like every day I wake up and I have like a few abuse emails. Just need to handle that. First few hours of every day are calling people, and emailing, and kind of like following up to explain what Shodan is. Because the majority of people still don't know. And then I have some abuse emails that get generated by people they randomly search their logs, and they're like, oh, well, what is this Shodan thing? And then they find a CNN article with a title, deadliest, scariest search engine. They're like, what's going on here? So they usually start in some form. This is like a polite version of it. Do not connect to my server. I get very irate emails. But it's really interesting that the majority of them, once you start talking to them, they're just normal people. The initial reaction is very apprehensive and like, what are you doing? You're trying to hack my network. Very defensive. They're very worried. But once you explain it to them and you start talking, sometimes I call them, it gets much better. In this case, okay, it's not a real resume, but I actually had a person, I've had several people that have wanted to work for Shodan after responding to an abuse email. So just keep in mind that to always be polite. If you start doing stuff on the internet and you start getting abuse emails, it's really, really easy to just be like, some days you wake up with like 20 abuse emails and you're like, oh, this is going to suck. But just be polite. Be polite, it'll work. For the most part. There are some people, and those are like the most dangerous people to work with. These are people that, they know like a little bit of technology, therefore they know everything. And anything you do that doesn't fit into whatever they think they know, you're just wrong. This is something I got. This is a guy that was completely irate. I mean, he's just completely mad. Like, he emailed everybody. He emailed my domain name provider, like, for Shodan.io. He emailed everybody. My hosting provider, the data center that my hosting provider was at, like, just contacted everybody. And why did he contact everybody? Because he saw a 404 in his log for Favicon. Like, okay, if you guys don't know what Favicon is, it's just, querying for an icon. But he saw a 404, and he thought I was hacking. I mean, how do you reason with somebody like this? I sent him articles, I sent him all this material, but I was already in his mind flagged as like this malicious, evil hacker who's intent on taking down his computer, which is like, one computer. These are usually small businesses, by the way, or individuals. I've never had this sort of interaction with big businesses. Big businesses are usually the opposite. They're like, you know what, we're using your data to see what other people on the internet see of us on the internet. It's like an external fingerprint for free. Because they get tons of traffic anyway. I don't really make a difference to them. But small people, small businesses, or single sysadmins, this is like the worst to deal with. Absolute nightmare. Sometimes I get, this is kind of sarcastically polite. Please exclude the internet from your scans. I'm like, how do you respond to this? It's like, yeah, no problem. I'll get right on it. It's like, okay. Like, some people just have a vendetta at this point. I don't know why they do it. You can't argue. This is actually from a security company. I don't want to say who they are, but this is actually from a security company. So they even understand what I do. They're just like, we just don't like it. Like, okay, can we work? Can we make it? No, just don't care. Just stop doing it. I'm like, I guess we're going to have to agree to disagree. And then, yeah, this is another one where people love to threaten. So I've never actually gotten sued. Shodan has never had a real lawsuit or anything like that, even close to it. But people love to threaten you. They threaten you all the time. Like, all the time. They're like, I'm going to contact the FBI, I'm going to contact DHS, the government, the CERT, like, everybody's going to get on you. I'm like, I've presented at InfraGard. Like, I've spoken to, I'm not some anonymous person who's in a complete isolation chamber. I talk to these people. Like, they do. I don't know about them, but I know I've spoken with the ICS CERT at DEF CON. They show up at security conferences too, and I talk to them. I mean, this is not some secret thing, but they love threatening with us. They love it. In this case, I actually, I know people at ICS CERT, so I emailed them saying, hey, would you mind getting a phone call from this person? Because this guy really, really, really wanted to talk to somebody in the government, so I was like, okay, fine, I'll give you a contact. And I haven't heard from him since. So it's like, just shut up. You don't know what you're talking about, but they really think they do. And it's also weird because, you see these abuse emails like, why are you talking about Favicon and stuff like that, when you're running MySQL and Redis and whatever other services without creds. Again, for whatever reason, people are really focused on all things related to web. It is so common. I'm in an awkward position where they're already angry at me. For whatever reason, I can't really tell them, you should probably fix your, totally, open services. I can't do that. So usually I just, notify the CERT or whatever else, or their hosting provider. Because talking to them directly is going to be futile. And yeah, this is from Penny Arcade. I feel like this is really, really true. And I actually feel like you don't even need an audience. Like, the audience doesn't need to be there. It's just, I don't know why, because very often this is how it starts out, and once you start talking to them, they revert back to the normal, because then you removed anonymity, and then everything is fine again. This is so true of my interactions with people and with abuse emails. So, yeah, just again, if you start doing this on the internet, just keep calm, and don't feed in whatever they are. Always stay polite, don't be sarcastic. Sarcastic doesn't work in emails. Just be polite. It's worked for me so far. I've been running for 4.5 years. I haven't gotten shut down, or totally shut down. Yeah, so in the early days of Shodan, I went through roughly a hosting provider a month. So I'd rent servers, I got shut down, moved to another one. Just because nobody knew who I was. You know, just some random guy scanning the internet, generating tons of abuse emails. Why would anybody work with me? So, you know, over time, I started to get articles, whatever else, and security people and presentations. It's become easier. But what I also started doing is I started creating reports. So I started to break down the actual abuse tickets. So I can go to the hosting provider and be like, look, this is how I break down the tickets. The majority of them are either automated or they're like, you know, repeating, whatever else. And I provide histograms. And finally, I keep track of how well I handle abuse tickets. And usually I can show some improvement. You know, I can empirically demonstrate that, look, I'm implementing these procedures, I'm reducing your support ticket load, so please keep me on, okay? I'm working with you. You know, it's just important to kind of be transparent and explain what you're doing to improve. Because to them, at the bottom line, it's about money. It really is. You know, initially I just rented the cheap VPSs, but once you start renting dedicated servers and more money is involved, you know, the equation changes, because now if you generate 5 abuse tickets a day, well, that's still less money in the support line than you pay them. So it's kind of an equation for them, where are you consuming enough of our support time, or, you know, too much of our support time to not cover how much you're paying us. It's kind of like this, you know, quid pro quo. So finally, I want to talk about some research that I'm doing. If you probably followed me on Twitter, I look at control systems recently, just because I'm not that interested in the web stuff anymore. This is one of the devices that you can use to connect a typical factory, a building, or all these, you know, traditionally analog devices to the internet. This costs $500. It's very easy. You plug it in, bam, Ethernet connectivity. You're done, right? What I started to do is I actually are surveying, looking for these raw protocols. So all the examples that I showed you before were still through a web interface. It was still somebody had to create a web interface with buttons and put on internet. These are different protocols. These are raw level protocols. Very often you can think of it as like you get full like read-write access to the memory of a controller. These are really low-level protocols that under pretty much no circumstance should be on the internet. And I started adding them. You can already search for them actually right now. And when I was doing that, I set up a honeypot. That's how I test my own stuff. I don't, you know, when I do these things, I do make sure that I don't accidentally crash devices. So I work with people to make sure that whatever code I run on all these systems won't hurt anybody on the internet, especially with these control systems, because you do not want to make it crash. This is like, you know, you do not want to accidentally turn off the turbine or something. You don't want to do that. So I installed Conpot, which is an ICS honeypot. And I ran my code against it, and, you know, everything seemed to work fine. And then I started realizing that these honeypots, they tend to be kind of static. And sometimes they run a lot of stuff that is, you know, a bit too good to be true. Like you're running Modbus and DNP3 and Telnet and like MySQL, and you're like, what is going on here? Like, who would ever run all these services together? And they're very predictable. You know, they don't change the banner. Everything is very static. So can you find them with Shodan? And yeah, the obvious answer is yes. So here, it's really small. But the basic gist is you can go to Shodan, and because all these honeypots follow the exact same pattern, they have the same serial number, that's an easy one to identify them. And this works for other honeypots too. So I've been starting to look at these sort of patterns that emerge once you have a huge data set. Like if you see the same serial pop up over and over and over again, what's going on there? In this case, you can easily identify honeypots. And the result of this is that if you're actually interested in, like, for example, I know a few months ago somebody did ICS research. And they set up honeypots, and they're like, oh, we saw all these connections from China, blah, blah, blah. They're so easy to detect. If you want to actually do something, you just exclude the honeypots from your survey. And bam, you know, at least the conpots, they will never even detect you. So making it so predictable means that effectively makes it very easy to avoid. So yeah, do not use defaults with anything. This also goes for security people with honeypots. So I talk about web and everything else, and if you've probably used Shodan, one of the searches you did was searching for webcams. Super popular, they're very easy. Again, all this web stuff is so accessible. It's kind of like instant gratification. You just click on a link, open it up, see a webcam. A guy named Vis did a talk on this. So if you want to know more about, follow Vis. And another thing I've looked at recently is the cloud. Because people don't treat the cloud the same way they treat a dedicated server. They don't treat the cloud the same way that you treat bare bones, hardware in a data center. It's the cloud, right? It's just this like amorphous blob. You can scale it up and down. I mean, what's wrong with that? And again, MongoDB and Redis are super popular in the cloud. So for both of these services, they have a really nifty command. With Redis, you can send it a monitor command, and it'll output everything in real time that is being done in Redis. People use Redis for sessions. In this case, they use it for a queue. And people store everything, like all interaction on a website. Sometimes they use it for caching. And all these things you can see in real time. And because it's on the cloud, they don't really think about it. And again, it's very interesting. You can get a lot of information by using these kind of commands. Another one is Elasticsearch. So this is an instance of Logstash. Logstash is a tool where you can make your log file searchable. This is a public Elasticsearch instance. So this is a database that contains all the log files of presumably various systems. They're all public. Very easy to find. And just to show that it is actually the cloud that's the culprit for most of this. This is MongoDB, public instances of MongoDB. And MongoDB doesn't really have authentication, so if you find MongoDB on the internet, it's going to be open anyway. And the top organization, I don't know whether you can read it, it's Amazon. So, and the other ones are like DigitalOcean, Rackspace. These are all cloud providers. So almost all of these services, these newer services that are super popular, are being deployed in the cloud and are exposed by default. So if there's one thing you should take away, it's just never use defaults. Never, ever, ever use defaults. This also goes for security people. It goes for everybody. Everybody does it. Even if you run masscan or ZMap, don't use defaults. You can detect that as well. When I talked about the patterns I look at, you can use NTP. I don't know, a few months ago there was NTP, and you can run a monlist command, and it'll tell you the recently connected IPs. So when you start running the monlist command on every single NTP server on the internet, and you store that and keep track of it, you can see who else is also doing it. So you can actually keep track of who's scanning the internet. I mean, Shodan is very easy because I don't try to hide it, but even if you think you're being sneaky and whatever else, you're leaving a pretty big footprint if you're using defaults for everything. So with that, thank you.
Does anybody have any questions?
Video game. System Shock 2. It's the evil AI in the game. So, no, it wasn't. It's just the iconic character of the video game. The actual protagonist is nameless. So. No, I don't look at that. No. Actually, a lot of the searches, sometimes they run under NDAs and stuff like that. Because people use Shodan to find devices on new research they've been doing. Like, security research, they've found a new, router with a backdoor or whatever else. And they need to make sure, I need to, provide them some sort of assurance that if they search on Shodan, that information will not get leaked. And businesses do the same thing. They scan, their networks with Shodan, and they need to know that that information is not going to leak to the public. So no, all searches, everything like that, private. Anything else? Depends. I mean, I scan the internet. I can guarantee internet scans once a month. So worst case, it'll take a month to pick up. Usually it's faster, depends which services. Some services I scan more than others, like HTTP, I do spend more resources on scanning, but I would at least guarantee within a month that it will detect it's been fixed. Well, just look at the domain. Like the reverse DNS entries for the crawler, so like .shodan.io. So it's pretty easy if you want to exclude it. Yeah. Oh. Nope, not yet. Working on it. Yep. What kind of, sorry? Mobile? I couldn't say specifically now. I mean, a lot of the, like, actually a lot of the PLCs and stuff like that, if you trace back, trace the IP, they're on Verizon wireless networks. So presumably they use, they go over a wireless network to make it accessible. But I don't have anything specific mobile.
All right. Well, again, thank you, John, for speaking